I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about agent causation in the topic of free will. If we contend that we have free will, we then have to explain where this free will comes from. The literature on free will is centered around the possibility of free will, with the opposing poles of determinism and libertarianism respectively denying and advocating for it. Theories on both sides agree on one thing. Cause and effect govern all interactions between things. I'm using things here in the broadest sense to include material objects such as balls, chairs, and tables, and also immaterial objects such as thoughts, emotions, drives, and ideas. They, however, differ on what the causes are. The hard determinist contends that there is no free will, since objects affect one another in a completely determinate way. For instance, knowing how one billiard ball strikes another, with how much force and at what angle, and the environmental factors such as the friction of the fabric of the billiard table and the air resistance, will allow us to compute the subsequent motion of both balls. This motion, the position, velocity, and acceleration of the balls, are completely determined by the strict laws of Newtonian mechanics, which seem like sub-laws of the laws of nature. The mechanical laws operate on the material front in a determinate way. On the immaterial front, our thoughts are caused by previous thoughts, emotions, drives, and inclinations. For instance, when faced with a choice between watching a movie or reading a book, my choice is affected by previous factors, such as parental emphasis on reading, pleasant memories of seeing moving pictures, or simply how I feel since I had spent the last 5 hours reading already, such that if we are able to trace back our thoughts and emotions, we will be able to predict our decision in a determinate way. Thomas Hobbes calls this the law of motives. The determinist worldview is predicated on the exactness of the mechanical laws which govern the motion of everything and the laws of motives which governs our intentions and corresponding actions. On the opposing pole is libertarianism, which claims that human beings, and perhaps other higher animals, have the power to determine themselves. For the determinists, since individual human beings are one object among many, for us to have an extra power that can determine itself seems like an extraordinary claim, since we will then be above nature or supernatural, a kind of miracle. Moreover, the libertarians will have to answer where this power comes from. Broadly, they have two theories: event causation and agent causation. Event causation follows the logic of the determinist to the extent that its adherents also trace the chain of cause and effect to predict decisions. How they differ from the determinists is that they do not admit that events are completely determined. They argue that there is an indeterminacy, that the mechanical laws and the laws of motives are not as rigid and exact as they seem. This view of indeterminacy has been buffeted by advances in the sciences, where quantum mechanics demonstrate indeterminacy on how the fundamental particles behave. In biology, random genetic mutation allows for new and potentially superior or inferior organisms to come into existence, according to Darwinian natural selection. Many natural processes, such as the decay of radioactive substances, or the motion of gases, are merely statistical, probabilistic rather than determinate. Extending this indeterminacy from the micro level to our macro level decision processes, how prior events affect our decisions will hence be indeterminate. Agent causation, while admitting cause and effect and indeterminism of natural phenomena, takes a different approach. It posits that human agents are the cause of their decisions, that they possess such a power of will or volition as part of their nature. The term free will, as its two words imply, means that the agent is free to make its own choices out of its own will. As individuals, we are the fundamental cause of what we will, and we, as cause, is irreducible to the movement of fundamental particles or prior motives such as a determinist may argue for, and irreducible to prior events, as an event causalist may argue for. At first glance, agent causation seems so obvious that it should be at the top of the list of theories of free will. And arguably it was since ancient times, as taught by Epicurus, Aristotle, and religious dogma of how some things are up to us. However, short of a bald assertion, the agent causalist needs to explain how such a free will is possible and from where it comes from. However, he is beset with several major difficulties. Beyond insisting that human beings are the fundamental cause of our actions, how can he explain how do we decide? If he tells us that the basis for our choice is our character, emotions, and thoughts, then he will need to explain how we got those. Yet, he cannot explain it based on previous experiences, external factors, learning, or even reasoning, since that is what the event causalist posits. What causes us to will what we will? If the agent causalist admits that there is something that causes us to will the way we do, other than our own will, then he is falling into the determinist and event causalist logic to look for some prior cause. This prior cause itself would then require yet an earlier prior cause, leading to an infinite regress. If the determinist is ready to give up the idea that all cause and effect are determined precisely, and accept that the relationship is probabilistic only, the way an event causalist posits, the agent is removed from the chain of cause and effect for both the determinist and the event causalist. It still reduces to mechanical cause and effect, albeit a probabilistic and not a deterministic mechanism with no agency necessary. Yet if the agent causalist denies prior causes, he seems to be positing a mystery at the heart of our free will. If we use our rationale to decide, our rationale is based on a logic such as to choose what is best for us based on objective factors. But if that is the case, it indicates that there is really only one choice that is the best choice, and that we have to choose that best choice. That would then be the logic of a compatibilist, where we have a determined universe, whether it is fully determined or merely probabilistic. If the choices are equivalent based on whatever selection criteria we are using, then there is no basis for a free will to choose either way, which would then make any decision when taken random. However, random decisions are also the enemy of agent causation, since if a choice is random, we are also not exerting our will, leaving it up to chance to decide. Hence, the agent causalist faces a dilemma. If our choice is based on strict reasoning or prior factors, it is merely a matter of calculation that leads to our decision, not requiring any agency or will to play a part. Yet if our choice is irrational and random, then it also seems to require no agency or will. In short, there seems to be no room for agency, since agency does not seem to have a role to play in deciding. An agent causalist will need to figure out the source of this agency he insists on, and then how an agent decides. What I want to examine in this essay is an article by Henry D. Porter and Kevin J. Mitchell entitled Naturalising Agent Causation, published in 2022. Porter is a PhD candidate at Trinity College Dublin, researching the biology of agency in the philosophy of biology, neuroscience and cognition, while Mitchell is Associate Professor of Genetics and Neuroscience, making this paper a collaboration between a philosopher and a biologist, which is a suitable match for a topic such as agent causation. They suggest 8 criteria which support the theory of agent causation. These do not definitively explain agent causation, but are more like hints to me to suggest how agent causation is possible. These criteria are 1. Thermodynamic autonomy, 2. Persistence, 3. Endogenous activity, 4. Holistic integration, 5. Low-level indeterminacy, 6. Multiple realizability, 7. Historicity, and 8. Agent-level normativity. Organisms or systems as a whole can have causal power that is not entirely reducible to the causal power of their component parts or determined by the state of the environment they posit. It is not any part of our bodies, such as our cells, atoms, molecules, or neurons, and their interaction with one another and the environment, that is the source of our decisions, the way a determinist will argue that it is. Instead, the agent causalist argues that our decisions inhere at the level of our whole being, and this causal power that is found at that level is not reducible to what is happening in the parts of our bodies or the environment and their interactions. Porter and Mitchell consider 3 challenges to agent causation. 1. Vertical reductionism, also known as supervenience, where a change at the macro scale is based on a change at the micro scale. Determinist argues for such a vertical reduction, where all causation comes from what is happening with fundamental particles or quantum fields, which leaves no room for any causal work at the macro levels. When we think we are the ones willing our action, that is merely epiphenomenal, an extraneous layer in our understanding that has no efficacy on reality. 2. Horizontal reductionism, where causation is attributed to parts of a system. For instance, my hand's motion is attributed to nerve muscles firing rather than my will. Event causation is an instance of horizontal reductionism, as it claims that an organism's actions are caused by states and events that simply involve the organism, such as the psychological state of a belief as the cause of an action. Both horizontal and vertical reductionism leave the agent out of the picture, since an agent is not just his atoms, nor just his psychological states. This is known as the problem of the disappearing agent. 3. External determinism, where a system is determined entirely by states and events in its environment, making the agent redundant. Porter and Mitchell's 8 criteria are meant to justify agent causation in a biological system. They do not postulate entities such as souls or invoke the supernatural, but want to find naturalistic explanations. These criteria are necessary but not sufficient conditions for free will. A system possessing all 8 may exhibit agent causation, but that does not necessarily mean it has free will. Nonetheless, it is a good start. This also seems to indicate that they think the agent causation is necessary but not sufficient for free will, though they do not elaborate why. At the end of this article, I will venture some reasons why I think they are right on this. Thermodynamic autonomy. To be considered a system needs to be distinguishable from its environment. This usually involves a physical boundary. Without such a boundary, we will be unable to tell if an action arose from within or beyond the agent. Such barriers in living systems are their skin or cell membranes, which allows them to be out of thermodynamic equilibrium with their environment. This barrier also causally insulates a system from events in its environment. Instead of being exposed to every flow of physical and chemical causation that comes its way, the system is sheltered from that storm and able to buffer its internal dynamics, they explain. A physical barrier lays the groundwork for systems to overcome the threat posed by external determinism. Persistence. Another foundational requirement is the persistence of a system through time. Some degree of persistence is needed in order to be around long enough to cause an effect, they add. Living systems exhibit persistence by surviving for some time. For an organism to persist, it needs as a whole system to be stable amid the constant internal flux of recursive chemical reactions and self-sustaining causal loops, where component parts do work to constrain one another within the bounds necessary to keep the whole system going. This system-wide effort undermines horizontal reductionism, since it is not just its individual parts or collection of parts that keeps the entire system in existence, but them working together in an integrated, holistic manner. Endogenous activity. For agent causality to be present, systems need to internally initiate their actions to some degree, so as to avoid being mere stimulus-response machines that are passively pushed around by the environment. In this way, external factors can influence, but not determinately cause the system's behavior, according to the authors. Autonomous organisms actively monitor and adjust to information from the environment rather than being pushed around by these conditions, assimilating these external inputs into ongoing patterns of biochemical and/or neural activity rather than being driven by these inputs. When there are no external stimuli, we continue to have internal activity such as thoughts. Porter and Mitchell writes, even when they appear from the outside to be at rest, they are not static internally. They are constantly doing work to readjust their internal configuration so as to keep the whole dynamic, self-maintaining process alive and persisting. This equips the system with a degree of causal autonomy from the environment. External stimuli can influence the system's behavior, but only within the context of its current internal dynamics. That is, the system's actions in the world are ultimately generated from within, with information from the environment used to guide these dynamics as needed. Moreover, information from the environment is often insufficient to determine one's course of action. Instead, organisms actively probe the environment, gathering information to decide what to do. Holistic integration. In external determinism, external factors are the cause of effects on a system. The system is being pushed around by external factors. In horizontal reductionism, parts or subsystems of a system perform their own specialized function, which cause the entire system to be affected, like parts of a machine whose functions then add up to form the system. The system is being pushed around by its parts, leaving no room for causal power that inheres at the level of the whole system, that is, agent-level causation. However, Porter and Mitchell tell us that not all systems can be coherently decomposed into separable parts in this machine-like manner, such as living organisms, which are dynamic, holistically integrated systems. Even in simple organisms such as bacteria, such holistic integration is observed. In human beings, brain areas we once understood as single-mindedly carrying out their work in relative isolation are in fact highly sensitive to the activity in other brain areas. Information about actions, goals, diverse sensory percepts, internal states, and other parameters is much more widely distributed than previously thought, meaning that all local signaling is modulated by the context of global brain states, note the authors. The system's total function cannot be decomposed into its parts functioning in isolation, but instead depends on the relations between those parts. To understand any given part, you must also understand the whole, they write, which means that causal power meaningfully inheres at the level of the whole. Low-level indeterminacy. Even if the above criteria deflate external determinism and horizontal determinism, a suitable theory still needs to deflate vertical determinism. The vertical determinist argues that the state of the entire physical system at time t, which may need to include the state of its environment, plus the low-level laws of physics, fully determine the state of the system at some subsequent time. The authors add, if the laws determining the interaction of particles or the evolution of quantum fields are causally comprehensive, then no higher order causes can be admitted. Quantum indeterminacy has however cast doubt, if not ruled out, such indeterminacy at the level of the fundamental particles. Portal and Mitchell explain. Though the Schrödinger equation gives a definite solution for how quantum fields comprising any system will evolve, this solution is a distribution of probabilities. As soon as some interaction occurs of the type necessary to actually observe the state of the system, but not actually relying on an observer per se, some particular set of these probabilities will be realized. What determines which set becomes realized within the probability parameters as defined seems to be truly random, unpredictable in principle, not just in practice, consistent with the Heisenberg uncertainty or indeterminacy principle. Multiple realizability. To have agency is to do things for our own reasons. Low-level entities such as atoms or neurons cannot have system-level reasons. For there to be agent causality, there needs to be some degree of causal autonomy from the lowest level parts, such that changes at the lowest level do not necessarily cause changes at the higher level in a simple feed-forward or bottom-up fashion, writes Porter and Mitchell. They explain that neuronal signaling is not simply a transmission of the same information from one neuron to the other. For some neurons, when they receive an input in the form of an electric charge from other neurons, if the charge does not reach a threshold, there is no further transmission. Other neurons may require an accumulation of electrical spikes within a given time frame before transmitting its signal, acting as temporal filters. Hence, the process of neuronal transmission is non-linear, with inputs not necessarily leading to outputs. Neuron communication is therefore generally not designed to be a faithful or exact transmission of information, but rather an interpretation of it, they write. Other neurons are coincidence detectors, requiring near-synchronous spikes from multiple input neurons before transmitting. Hence, the low-level details become coarse-grained, meaning that two different sets of low-level spikes may result in the same activity in a downstream neuron. What this implies is that a higher-level activity may be multiply realized on the lower levels, which undermines vertical determinism, since it means that macro-state activity is not determined by what is happening at the micro-state, but instead is the other way around, where the macro-state is realized at the micro-state and can be realized in multiple ways. Historicity. Porter and Mitchell have described how neurons behave, but the vital question is why they behave as they do. Why are there temporal filters, coincidence detectors, and energy threshold filters which interpret the signals? To answer this, we have to look at what such functions mean for the system. Natural selection is about the ability to successfully persist over time in order to reproduce. What conditions permit better adaptation for the purpose of survival and reproduction will be deemed as good, and what does not as bad, leading to a value system for the organism. Values create meaning in the individual. For instance, food, because of its benefit to the organism, has a positive meaning, while poison has a negative one. A source of these meanings is from previous generations' interactions with the world and are then instantiated through the design of the system, the designer being Darwinian natural selection. The authors write, both natural selection and learning do causal design work, They configure the system in such a way that it embodies pragmatic knowledge about the world and itself that can be used to direct adaptive action. With meaning and value as motivators for action, the organism adapts its endogenously generated patterns of active behavior to its environment and circumstances, learning what to learn from, what information to seek out, and what active tactics and strategies to use to best pursue their goals, crafting their own environments as they do so. This translates to beliefs, desires, and intentions, taking action for its own reason as an agent to better achieve its aim. Agent-level normativity. However, even if we accept that higher-level meaning is what drives lower-level neuronal behavior, event causalists may argue that beliefs, desires, and intentions are the events that cause subsequent effects, that these psychological states are what are doing the causal work, while the agent is simply the arena in which such states arise. Bottle and Mitchell objects to this view by a straightforward yet astute observation. Beliefs, desires, and intentions are things that only an agent can have. Neurons do not have beliefs. Neural circuits do not have desires. Brains do not have intentions. Moreover, an intention is not a thing, either a substance or an event, that can either exist or have causal power by itself. It is the agent having the intention that has causal relevance to what happens. The authors now stitch their criteria together. When the entire set of such psychological states is taken into account at any moment, holistically integrated and freighted with historically grounded meaning, we contend that this just is agent causation. Meaning inheres at the level of the whole system. Percepts, drives, actions, and their consequences mean something for the whole agent, not for its parts, because from an evolutionary perspective, the whole organism is the locus of fitness, not its parts. Natural selection thus crafts the control system of living organisms to detect, characterize, and operate on signals as they are relevant for the survival of the whole organism. What matters to natural selection is not the survival of the parts of the organism, but the whole being. Similar to how what matters to a person is not that she has an intact body that will die because of a gangrenous arm. Better to live without an arm than to be altogether dead. Hence, it is not the part that decides our fate, but the whole. The whole being is the locus of meaning and also the locus of control that is informed by and evaluated relative to that meaning. For increased fitness, animals have evolved the ability to learn. What it does learn and value is what is good for its whole being and not just for its parts. Individual neurons do not fear rewards or punishments. The agent does, and it is the agent that is guided by these signals, writes Bottle and Mitchell. What the authors have set out to do is to demonstrate the feasibility of agent causation, not through postulating extra-natural entities like souls, but to consider how natural explanations can suffice to account for agency. To do so, they argue against the free will constraining challenges of external determinism, vertical reductionism, and horizontal reductionism. In addition, they have to counter also the libertarian theory of event causation. The authors sum up. Systems can be agents if they are self-organizing and causally insulated enough to persist through time, out of thermodynamic equilibrium with its environment. To avoid external determinism, they need to be intrinsically active, treating external inputs more as helpful information than determinate causal forces. The proactive self-organizing activity of these systems entails a holistically integrated structure in which parts are too interconnected and context-dependent to be understood in a machine-like decomposable linear fashion, contra horizontal reductionism. On top of this, These systems can be driven by meaning and reasons because higher order organizational patterns are able to cause grain over microphysical happenings by virtue of the existence of some degree of indeterminacy at lower levels. This meaning derives from temporally extended causal processes that shape the physical structures of the system to reflect and respond to information about the world that is relevant to it. The meaning of higher order states is thus grounded in historical interaction with the environment and attuned to given selection criteria. Example, in natural selection, the criteria is persistence and reproduction. We contend that a system whose activity is informed by this kind of higher order meaning just is a system that is acting for reasons, contra vertical reductionism. Additionally, these reasons are rightfully understood as inhering at the level of the whole system, because that is where the locus of fitness is that which selects for them, that level is what those reasons are about, and so that is where the appropriate locus of meaning and causality lies, contra event causation. My assessment is that Porter and Mitchell did a remarkable job in laying out a comprehensive framework that accounts for how a living system makes decisions as its own agent. Decisions are taken at the system level, in a holistic, integrated way with value and meaning only present at the system level and not at a micro level. Prominent libertarian philosopher Robert Cain also attempted a naturalistic explanation, appealing to quantum indeterminacy and thermodynamic disequilibrium as a possible biological mechanism for free will in his 1996 book, The Significance of Free Will. He too sets out to make arguments that avoid mystical concepts like soul or even agents, because he had to argue, like Porter and Mitchell, against the other positions in the free will debate, such as determinism and compatibilism, which do not have to rely on such concepts. 26 years later, Porter and Mitchell has provided a more comprehensive naturalistic account, adopting the same tack as Cain to avoid mystical explanations. However, naturalistic accounts can only consider naturalistic factors such as survival, reproduction, and further on, sensual pleasures and pains as motivators for action. This may work well for most animals, but the human being operates on a yet higher level, requiring intellectual, emotional, moral, and spiritual satisfaction that is difficult to reduce to naturalistic explanations. We may act in ways counter to our human nature of self-preservation, such as adopting ascetic behaviors like fasting or self-flagellation, sometimes unto death, being a martyr in pursuit of spiritual or ideological aims, or sacrifice ourselves out of love. We may also act altruistically to benefit others to our own disadvantage, or adopt even higher level systems thinking, such as to benefit a collective like an organization, a society, or the world at our own expense. These are also examples of human agency, but I, at least for the moment, am unable to imagine how they can be accounted for naturalistically without reducing their noble intentions to vulgar aims. For instance, carrying out altruistic acts for the pleasure they give to the benefactor, or self-sacrifice just to gain reward instead of being out of love for another. What Porter and Mitchell have done is to demonstrate the viability of agency to be causal, linking already well-known facts such as quantum indeterminacy to how they matter for system-level agency, which in itself is a tremendous achievement. If, however, we believe that a free will can intend acts done out of pure goodness or evil, acts not intended to generate any utility whatsoever, such as to enhance survival or to generate pleasure, theorists will need to go beyond naturalistic explanations. Nonetheless, Porter and Mitchell have laid a proper foundation for the existence of basic agencies that others may now transcend. Thank you for listening to The Philosophical Bachelor.